Everyone, and welcome to another edition of Space Warfighter Talks. I'm your host, Bill Wolf, the president and founder of the Space Force Association. We are honored today to have with us Major General Chad Franks, the 15th Air Force commander. General Franks, thanks so much for being here today.
Hey, thanks for having me, Bill. We're hippie. It's good to see you. Looks like you're aging well.
Thank you, sir. You're too kind. And also maybe a liar, but I appreciate the words all the same. Sir, before we get going, and people are going to have questions, I know, about, why are we talking to the 15th Air Force commander about space? So, sir, if you wouldn't mind just providing a brief overview of your background and then what led you to your current role here as the 15th Air Force commander.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good question, but I'll kind of lay out, I started out a long time ago, obviously, air traffic control officer initially, and then down the road went to pilot training. Initially out of pilot training, I'm a helicopter pilot by trade. So started out at Hurlbut Field as an AFSOC helicopter pilot for a number of years, and then flowed into combat rescue. That's where I did my director of operations for, and I was a squadron commander out at Nellis of the 6th Rescue Squadron. From there, did a little Army War College, and then went back to SOCOM, where I was I was in the Futures division at SOCOM. From there, back to helicopters to our schoolhouse at Albuquerque. And then, like I said, rescue as a squadron commander. I did it as a group commander as well at Moody. Deployed to the CAOC for a year as the chief of staff for the CFAC, and then went right back to Moody as the wing commander of the 23rd Wing. From there, I got the distinct pleasure of going to the Pentagon for the first time for a year and working for the vice chief of staff of the Air Force, who was at the time General Goldfein. And then he had a brilliant idea that after that tour that I needed to expand my horizons. And so he gave me the opportunity to go out to Vandenberg and be the 14th Air Force vice. Luckily, General Raymond said yes. And so that's where I ended up. And that's where we first met out at Vandenberg. I got exposed to the space mission for 18 months out there, and it was a huge education for me, being someone that had always used space but really didn't understand the mission. And then from there, I left Vandenberg and went out to Iraq. I was the deputy commanding general for CJTF OIR, and that timing was just perfect because I used a lot of what I learned at Vandenberg in that role as we were getting after ISIS there and destroying the caliphate in Syria and Iraq. Then from there, I got the honor to come here to Sumter to be the at the time was 9th Air Force commander, and now we've transitioned to 15th Air Force because we've grown a little bit over the last year, and that's how I ended up here in Sumter and as 15th Air Force commander.
Great, thank you, sir. And that goes right into really our next question, which is the 15th Air Force assumes a broad portfolio, the organized training and equip mission for all Air Combat Command's conventional forces, and to present a deployable joint task force capable headquarters that can provide command and control of integrated ACC forces. Tell us what the 15th Air Force provides for the nation.
I tell you, what we give the nation is dominant combat air power. Not to be flippant or anything, but that's what it is. We're the largest NAF in the combat air forces right now. Over 800 aircraft and about 45,000 airmen that are just getting after it every single day. And so that's what we deliver. As you mentioned in your question, we also are delivering a JTF capability, service retained by the Air Force, but able to go across the spectrum of conflict and provide a JTF with an air-minded commander. It was something that was started by our previous Chief of Staff of the Air Force, General Goldfein, and it started with 9th Air Force. It's continued to 15th Air Force, and we're still making progress towards realizing that capability. I will say that we've been able to use this capability recently with the COVID response. We started last March, where we were asked to stand up a task force and participate with Army North, part of Northcom, to provide an O8 headquarters in order to provide medical providers to states that were didn't have the capacity for the initial onslaught of the coronavirus. We did that for a couple of months. Here we had Region 3 and Region 4 of the U.S., FEMA Regions 3 or 4. We did that for a while, and then we kind of got, as the spike kind of flattened out, we stood down, but we stayed on a prepare to deploy order. Just yesterday, we got activated again as part of Northcom's planning to see how we can help the country with vaccinations across the U.S. here in the next couple of months. So now we're going through that planning process, and we'll be one of the O8 headquarters that will help the states with getting vaccinations up in a rapid manner. So we're able to demonstrate that we've come a long way since 2016 when Drew Goldfein first said, "Hey, I want Ninth Air Force to stand up this capability," to a point where we're actually able to go demonstrate it, that we have the capability to actually do it. So proud staff. Still work to be done on resources, but they've done a real good job, and I think we have a pretty good capability right now.
Sure, that's great news, and it's great that the JTF is standing up to help with the coronavirus vaccine. It's tremendous and important work. So you mentioned air dominance, and I'm tracking all. With air dominance, strike, command and control, and installation and combat support forces in your command, there's a tremendous opportunity to explore concepts for joint all-domain command and control. What is the 15th Air Force doing to bring the Air Force's visions of joint all-domain command and control to reality?
We're doing a fair amount. Obviously, our forces are a lot of our forces are deploying on a regular basis, so they're getting ready for that every single day. But we have had some instances where we were able to participate in helping the Air Force with moving forward on JADC2 ABMS. Take, for instance, the task force that we had. Northcom did a really good job of exploring with joint all-domain command and control. We actually gave iPads out to those that were going out in the field, and they were able to see exactly what was going on at the tactical level all the way up to the strategic level. When it comes to supplies and how patients were doing and needs that they needed, and so we were participants in that. We've also had a lot of our JSTARS units and our AWACS units participate in the ABMS experiments. We're trying to link the operators up with the acquisition officers so that we get a really good product that will be useful. And then I would also say that our 93rd AGAL that has all of our JTACs, TACPs, they've been doing quite a bit with JADC2. Obviously, they're down there at the tactical edge as well. And that's what JADC2 is all about, right? Linking sensors and shooters at all levels so that we can have a quicker decision process to get ahead of our adversaries. And they're experimenting with different ways to do that in various exercises that they've been doing recently.
Yes, sir. And for the folks listening in and watching, just know that we just premiered a video where we interviewed some members of the 13th ASOS down at the tactical level and how they're getting after exactly what you're describing, integrating space capabilities in the critical mission of the JTACs and TACPs there in that organization. So if you haven't had a chance yet, go out to YouTube, type in Space Force Association, and you'll be able to see that video to get more understanding of what General Franks is talking about. So, and I understand also to get after JADC2, you've got a Space Force member that is on staff now. And I'd say he's probably one of the smartest Space Force officers that we've got as a previous director of Space Forces.
Yeah, we were lucky to get Bob Reeves here in our staff. He's made the transition to the Space Force. So he's the only one running around with the blue tabs on. Although I tell him that we have 2 space officers because I claim myself as a space officer, so I have the wings to go with it. But he's exceptional, very smart individual, and it's good to have him, especially in our JTF role. We got to have that kind of expertise because in everything that we do, you know, space, as you well know, space is going to be involved in a key component of our mission set. So having Bob here is excellent. And as we go forward, we need to continue that relationship, you know, between the Space Force and the Air Force of sharing that talent and that expertise back and forth.
Yes, sir. No, that's great. That's a great point, especially when we start looking at and exploring the options, I'm sure, of having air experts supporting the Space Force, you know, eventually. So thank you for that. Sir, your personal tactical experience is a unique combination of air traffic control, as you mentioned, special operations, and combat search and rescue. In each of those missions, the operator develops the ability to work jointly. How has that experience shaped how you approach your current role at 15th Air Force?
Well, it's shaped it a lot. I mean, I've spent most of my time in joint operations. You know, we're always going to fight joint. We're always going to fight coalition. There has been a time where we haven't. And so it was good to have that experience as we came here to 15th Air Force and kind of change the culture and the mindset of how we come to work every day thinking about how to be a JTF and how to think jointly and use the joint processes that we need on a regular basis. And, you know, and now this includes the Space Force. And again, as you mentioned, we got Bob here because we can't forget that now that's part of the joint force. You know, my old boss used to talk all the time about space, and he would say that, you know, space was like the air to the joint force, you know, and until you don't have it, you just don't think about it until it's not there, and then you start to choke on it. And that's right. And so we have to make sure that not only is the Space Force and the Air Force working together, but that all of our airmen and our guardians are thinking about what the other one brings. And I think we're doing a lot better job these days of that, because I've found in 15th Air Force, you know, our airmen they understand that they need the space domain in order to get after their mission. You look at the ACE concept that we're now heavily involved with, communications. I think a lot of our commanders and our senior NCOs are much more cognizant of the fact that, hey, we don't do this unless we have all the domains, and they realize that space is a critical component to that. And that's good to see. We got to make sure that education continues.
Yes, sir. Thank you. You know, a decade and a half ago, you were a futures analyst at U.S. Special Operations Command. Attempts to predict the future are challenging. Are there any threats, technologies, or concepts you were looking at the time which came to fruition or that you see becoming reality in the very near future?
Well, you're right. The future is hard to predict. We were completely wrong. but you know, I mean, we saw a lot of the issues that we had as a force, even back then when I was a major at SOCOM. A lot of that was we were in stovepipes, you know, especially, you know, in the special ops world. You know, intelligence is a huge piece of the operations that we do. And so how do we get information? How do we get data quicker to those that need it, and ensuring that it goes to the right people at the right level? I mean, that's basically JADC2. We didn't call it that back then, but we were trying to figure out back then, you know, how do we get into the hands of our shooters the information they need, but also at the operational level and the strategic level at the same time quickly, so that we can get ahead of our adversaries. So we knew that was going to be an issue. We started working on it way back then. Again, we didn't call it JADC2, but we were thinking about it back then. So it's good to see that all the services now have you know, locked arms and said, yeah, this is something that we have to get after if we're going to stay ahead of our adversaries in future fights as we go forward.
Yes, sir. You know, 20 years ago, you rescued the F-117 pilot shot down in Serbia. What do you recall as a contributing factor from the Space Forces to the rescue?
Well, I mean, we'd have never found him if it wasn't for space, you know, to be honest, because the assets that were being used, you know, in CSAR, combat search and rescue, the goal is to take out the search piece, because when you're searching in enemy territory, you're putting a lot of people at risk. And so space really provided that rapid location, which helps take out the search. Now we still had to do a little bit of searching back then, but it really was extremely helpful. I didn't just think about all the things that we used, again, that we used to take for granted. GPS, all of our comms that we were using, SATCOM. I mean, you know, if you're a low-flying helicopter, line of sight is not very useful. So we had to rely a lot on SATCOM to get updates and to get those ellipses that we needed in order to find a downed aviator, especially where he was located. So when I look back on it, we took it for granted back then, and young Captain Franks probably didn't think about space at the time, but it was probably, you know, 80% of the mission was being used from the space domain as we went in. I mean, obviously we did it through the air domain, but it was huge when I look back on it.
Yes, sir. And that's a good point you bring up. You know, Captain Franks didn't think about it back then. How has that evolved? And to your point, you know, how are you integrating some of those lessons learned and ensuring that airmen and guardians are having those discussions? Could you describe just a little bit how that's evolved from then to now, and kind of some efforts you're working on specifically?
Yeah, I mean, it's evolved a lot, as you know, and you know, again, I learned, you know, up until prior to me going to Vandenberg, I understood that, you know, how important space was, but I really didn't understand how it worked entirely. Yeah, you know, as you could tell from some of the questions I asked you when I got to Vandenberg, but understanding, you know, how the space domain works and how we need to defend it, and those kind of things were huge. I mean, my follow-on assignment just in CJTF OIR, it was enormous, because then as a senior leader now in an operation, I was making sure that I was saying the same things that my space experts were saying, is that, hey, we can't think of the space domain in a stovepipe. It has to be baked into every operation that we do, starting from the ground up. Even when we start talking about targeting, we got to start talking about the space domain. And it was fun to watch, because from the CAOC and from the space experts that we had in the JTF, they truly were. They were part of the team. They were in there, and they were making sure that we were getting after it from all domains, but especially the space domain. They had some tremendous effects in that fight that I got to see firsthand. So it was really good to see. And I think our airmen now, as they do go to the AOCs and they go to JTFs and they see that operation and they interact with those guardians, and we're sharing that info back and forth. I think we are so much better today than we were back when Captain Franks was walking around, flying around. It's not even close, and I think it's just going to get better and better as we move forward.
Yes, sir. And it's funny that you say, or it resonates, obviously, that space has to be integrated into the joint fight. And it sounds like our Colonel retired Mitch Stratton, words he used to say all the time back at 14th Air Force. And I think he's online in our audience right now. So those words are obviously resonating with the space community. And sir, you bring up that point about the AOC and the JTF. As a director of staff at U.S. Air Force Central Command in 2013-2015, you directly supported the CFAC, the Combined Forces Air Component Commander, in leading airspace and cyber operations for the major ongoing conflicts in the region. During that time, the Air Force was beginning to develop its concepts of multi-domain command and control, the precursor to JADC2 that we've been talking about a little bit already. What motivated the conceptual change in how to command and control forces from an AFCENT perspective?
My take on it, Hippie, is that, you know, I would argue that we were doing multi-domain operations even back then, but we were doing it very, very slow, and we were doing it in stovepipes and sometimes by happenstance. And so, you know, part of it, again, you know, this goes back to your experience that you have, you know, shapes what you do as a leader and as a commander. And a lot of that for General Goldfein at the time, who was the CFAC when I was there, that shaped his thinking about JADC2, because he would look out and he would see that, you know, he had a CSAR cell on the floor that had its own system. And then right next to that cell was the space cell. They had their own system. They didn't talk. So the only way they could share information was to, you know, have a discussion back and forth. And he had multiple systems on the floor, none of them were talking to each other. And so we were doing multi-domain operations, but we were doing it extremely slow. And so he realized that in a pure fight, we're going to have to be a lot faster than that. And we got to be able to share that data and get the information to the appropriate level to make decisions quicker, so that then those at the tactical edge are getting what they need faster to stay ahead of our adversaries. And I think that's what really shaped his thinking on JADC2. And that's why that was one of his things as the chief of staff. And I think General Brown, from his time, he spent a lot of time in the KOC, he spent a lot of time in CENTCOM, he spent a lot of time in PACAF. So he has seen the threats that we're going to face and that we are facing. And he realizes that we absolutely have to get after this. And as General Brown would say, we got to get after it faster. We got to accelerate, change, or lose, because our adversaries are catching up with us. And I mean, as you know, I mean, all those things I talked about from my time in Allied Force and Desert Storm and all those, as we were learning how important space was, so was our adversaries. China, Russia, they know how important space is to us. And so they were gaining on us during that whole time, as we've been doing a lot of that fighting in the Middle East against counter VEOs, but they're catching up, as you know. And so they were watching as well. And that's why we really have to get after this JADC2 piece and get it right.
Yes, sir. The Air Force maintains a strong culture with many subcultures. As the Space Force matures, its members will be setting the foundation for a culture which will endure. What aspects of Air Force culture do you consider of greatest value for the Guardians to carry with them into the Space Force?
That's a great question. I would say that the two most important is innovation and flexibility. And I think from what I saw in my time learning the space business is I think y'all have that culture, and I think y'all are already bringing that with you. But we're going to have to be innovative, and we're going to have to be flexible and not get locked in. The Space Force is going to be a small force, much like the Air Force was when it first broke away from the Army. And when you don't have a lot of resources, it forces you to be innovative, and it forces you to be flexible. And I think, the Guardians that you all have, I was super impressed with the personnel that I got to work with when I was out at 14th Air Force. And y'all have no lack of talent. And I think as long as they know that they're trusted, and you give them some leeway to get after some of the problem sets that you all have, they're going to figure it out. They'll get out in front of the senior leaders, and that's a good thing. It's always better to have to pull somebody in than to try to kick them and tell them, hey, we got to go solve these problems. They're going to get after it. And I think that's the culture that you all should take from the Air Force. And I think you have that innovation, that initiative, and that flexibility to be able to look at a problem and go, hey, we might want to think about this a little bit different. I think you have to, just because of the domain that you all work in. It's an enormous AOR that you guys have that you have to be concerned about. And so I think you're going to have that culture going forward.
Yes, sir. No, completely understand. Sir, I've got a question from the audience. Lieutenant Colonel Henry Herron, he's the space officer over there at NATO. And he's asking, because of the experience that you've got, going into 14th Air Force, and his question specifically is, with so many senior Air Force leaders appreciating space is important, but as you say, may not understand the intricacies of how space works, what suggestions would you have for fellow senior Air Force leaders to transition from appreciation to understanding with regards to space?
I think we got to start earlier. I had that chance, when I was a brigadier general. I would argue that might be a little too late. It was a good experience, and so I think we got to look at not just at that level, but at lower levels of how we get that exchange of ideas. And I think it goes both ways. It's the Space Force sending officers back into the Air Force and getting those kind of experiences, and the same thing going the other way. And so, I would look at maybe more opportunities like at the major level, and then possibly the colonel level, because then those are the officers that eventually will go on to be senior leaders, and then they'll already have that experience. And I think we have to look at it too from our enlisted point of view. I mean, we ought to be sending more senior NCOs to get that kind of experience, and then even looking at the NCO corps. And I think that benefits both Air Force and Space Forces going forward. So I would just say we probably ought to start a little bit earlier, and I think it would pay lots of benefits.
Sure, that's
Good question, though.
Yeah, that is a great response, and completely agree. Probably, as you say, on both sides, Space Force folks need to understand joint fight, and of course, Air Force folks need to understand specifically how space contributes to the joint fight. So, very good words, sir. I can't thank you enough for you taking time out of your busy schedule today to talk about the criticality of space in support of 15th Air Force. Sir, any closing comments that you got?
I would say, I'm a little jealous of all of you guys that are in the Space Force. It's an exciting time. In fact, I just saw one of your space senior leaders up at WebTAC, and I told him the same thing. I'm like, it's an exciting time to be standing up a new force, and then the mission is just is incredible. And so I wish them all the best of luck, and we're going to be good teammates here in the Air Force as we go forward. And I'll make sure Bob Reeves stays busy while he's here.
Sir, that's great news. And sir, good luck on the standing up the JTF in support of the COVID vaccine. And again, sir, thanks so much for taking time. Have a great Air Force Day, and Semper Supra.
All right. Thanks, Hippie. Appreciate it.
All right, sir. Bye now.